Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this new IEA Africa University. So, a webinar proposed by the International Energy Agency for African energy experts. Today, we are very happy and pleased to have Jinsoon Lim, our colleague from the Energy and Climate Change Unit, who will present a recent report on the resilience of hydropower to future climate impacts and having a specific look to Africa. So this will be, I think, a very insightful presentation. And while the last participants are joining us, let me maybe first give a bit more of context on why those webinars and what's the overall goal. So as some of you may know, the IEA, so International Energy Agency, is an intergovernment institution. We are at the heart of the global energy dialogue and at the heart of dialogue on energy transition and climate. And we are an institution based in Paris with 300 staff. And the IEA, which has a bit less than 50 years, is covering all fuels and all technologies related to energy and to climate, as we will see today. And very concretely, we can summarize our intervention, saying that we do three things. A, we provide data, and this is based on collection with each and every country in the world, with partners and with dialogue with governments. So in the case of Africa, we've been working a lot with AFREC under the Africa Union, and we are very pleased to continue discussing with all of your countries, all of your teams working on statistics to increase the coverage of statistics we are able to collect and to have discussions with you on collecting, treating, and making more reliable energy statistics for the entire energy system. B, the IEA is offering policy advice for policymakers. So, for example, we convey high-level summits, and every year with the Africa Union, we have a Pan-African ministerial summit aiming to gather all the energy ministers of the continent to discuss top priority for the African energy agenda. And C, we support implementation of those policies towards a future of the energy world that would be more secure, more affordable, more sustainable. And this implementation translates into concrete capacity reinforcement, as well as more concrete activities or research done with several countries on specific topics. So this today's webinar is happens in the framework of a capacity reinforcement program, which IEA implements based on a support from the European Union. So it's a capacity reinforcement program on both energy statistics and energy modeling, so tools for making long-term plannings. And we have under this program 10 focus countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Also, we are very happy to welcome today energy experts from other countries to make this intervention and this webinar as open as possible. But just to elaborate a bit more on this program, so we have country by country training. So we already did some session with Ethiopian colleagues, and more countries are to come over the course of the year. We are starting with online course, of course, but then we'll come to each and every country to have more in-depth and more practical training sessions. And beyond those country by country courses on statistics and modeling, we are very happy to propose to a community of African experts many activities, including this webinar and many others to come. You can already save the date for the next IEA Africa University, which will be next month in March, Thursday 11th, on the recent IEA 2020 renewable reports. And for those who are not already part of our WhatsApp group, please, you can write to me so that we add you. And this is a very practical way to share any last minute or practical information. So that was for the context, but let me discuss a bit more what is the topic of today before giving the floor to Jinsoon. We'll discuss climate impacts on hydropower in Africa. And I first wanted to set the scene of hydropower in Africa, looking at the electricity generation by source or by technology in Africa in recent years. So here, hydropower is a dark blue band, and you can see that if we look at the past decade, the share of hydropower in electricity generation has remained stable between 15 and 17% of electricity generated, although it was there's been an increase of all the generation. But behind this figure, which is for the entire continent of Africa, it's interesting to have a look region per region, because as you may know, the electricity power generation mix is very different across those regions. In North Africa, we have a lot of gas in power generation. South Africa is highly relying on coal. So if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, we can see that the share of hydropower is way higher. It's above 50%. In terms of capacity, installed capacity in the continent, we are today a bit below 40 gigawatts of installed capacity for hydropower. But the potential in the continent is much bigger. And if we look at projections based on IEA modeling exercise and scenario, so this is something we'll discuss more in depth during the technical training on energy modeling. But depending on the hypothesis in this scenario, we see that there is room for a tripling or even quadrupling of electricity generated by hydropower by 2040. So just to say that this energy is today very important in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, and its role is really able to increase a lot over time. On that, I just want to now give the floor to Jinsoon to enter more into the details of the report she coordinated and led on the climate resilience for African hydropower. Jinsoon, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will share my screen. Okay. I think I need to change the, okay, thank you. So now you can see the slide view, right? Okay, great, thank you very much. So hello everyone. So as Arno introduced, I'm Jinsoon Lim. I'm Energy and Environment Policy Analyst of IEA. So I'm so happy to join this webinar and present the key findings of the African Hydropower Report. I hope you find it interesting. So first, in the beginning, I would like to introduce why we decided to look at African hydropower in the climate impacts on them. So as you all know, Africa is one of the most susceptible regions to climate change. The majority of African countries are likely to see an increase in temperature and also more variability in their precipitation patterns. So according to the IPCC report, we usually call it AR5, and they said that in a high emissions scenario, Africa will be more vulnerable than the average of the world. So in my experience, more than 4 degrees Celsius increase of global warming, while the rest of the world are experiencing about 3.7 degrees. Also, the changing precipitation pattern can aggravate climate impacts on the continent. For example, Southern Africa, where hydropower accounts for over 20% of the electricity of the regional power pool, could experience electricity shortages due to a consistent increase of droughts in the forthcoming decades. On the other hand, in East Africa, we are expecting a wetter climate there. So climate change with the increasing temperatures and erratic precipitation patterns are likely to affect hydropower generation in Africa. So generation output can fluctuate depending on the variations of annual stream flow and also seasonal stream flow, and also increase the evaporation due to the temperature rise. In extreme weather events such as floods and droughts, as we mentioned, they can also affect the stability and reliability of hydropower generation and also the entire electricity system. Despite the projected impacts of changing climate, hydropower is likely to play an increasing role in Africa. So as mentioned by Arno, currently 17% of electricity generation is generated from hydropower. And the share of the continent's hydropower is expected to grow further to more than 23% by 2040, according to the IEA's Sustainable Development Scenario in 2019. If we make the efforts to meet the climate goals and also sustainable development goals, of course, the importance of African hydropower will increase as well. Indeed, as you know, that many African countries already started many hydropower projects to untap the enormous potential of hydropower generation in the continent. This is the picture of the droughts which happened to the Kariba Dam, which happened in 2015 and 2018. So IEA is actually trying hard to contribute to climate resilience of African hydropower. We are also focusing other regions as well, but we are now focusing on the African hydropower project. So climate resilience refers to the capacity to anticipate, absorb, and accommodate and recover from the effects from climate change. And also climate impact refers to the actual consequences of climate change, according to our definitions. So IEA's report about climate impacts on African hydropower, as you can see on the left side, the first report, we tried to enhance the climate resilience of African hydropower through a climate risk and impact assessment, and also introducing effective climate resilience measures. We also focus on how climate change affects clean energy transitions and electricity security. So our African desk is also looking at some clean energy transitions in North Africa, and they are planning to expand the regional scope to other parts of Africa too. And at the global level, we have introduced the Power Systems in Transition report as well. If you are interested in, they are all available on our website, so please visit our website. So you might have questions that how we can assess climate impacts on African hydropower. So I would like to briefly introduce the methodologies, how we assess the climate impacts. So we focused on 13 African countries in 64 hydropower plants between 2020 to 2099. The assessment covers Nile Basin countries. We included Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, and Uganda, and also Congo and Zambezi Basin countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And we selected one North African country, Morocco, and West African country, Ghana. The assessment covers over 18,000 megawatts of installed hydropower capacity in total, accounting for around 50% of the total installed capacity of the entire continent. So, and we use 5 general circulation models and 4 global hydrological models. So we made them as an ensemble. So we calculated and compared 20 different ensembles of the circulation and hydrological models. And we used 2 emission scenarios, so below 2 degrees Celsius and around 3 degrees Celsius. So by comparing these 2 scenarios, the report aims to present how greenhouse gas concentration is likely to affect hydropower capacity factors in Africa. So from now until the end of the century, the mean hydropower capacity factor of selected hydropower plants is projected to decrease due to climate change in both scenarios. So you can see the average trends of both scenarios right now. So the capacity factor of analyzed African hydropower plants is likely to decrease by approximately 3% between 2060 to 2099 compared to the baseline period of 2010 to 2019. So the projected decrease in the regional mean hydropower capacity factor in both scenarios may generate false impressions. You might think, okay, 3% decrease wouldn't be that big, and hydropower generation capacity factor varies every year, even more than 10%, and why would it matter if we're like 3%? But I would like to give you a little bit more details about the importance of this result, because first of all, we didn't assume any kind of aging or demand growth in our projections. So if you can imagine that the electricity demand in this region is growing very fast, given the economic growth and population growth, and the decrease of the 3% of the hydropower capacity factor would bring more stress to the region. And also, we didn't consider any aging facilities, any aging impacts of the facilities or components, and etc. We only consider the climate impacts. So the climate impacts solely contribute to this 3% decrease. And also, in the next slide, I will explain that the climate change and different levels of global warming have really significant impacts in the different countries, but they have different impacts from the climate change. In some regions, they might experience increase in their hydropower capacity factor, while others experiencing decrease. So that's why it makes some kind of compensation between the two regions. So it led this conclusion. So country-specific data show that climate change will have a significant impact on most African countries, although the impacts may vary from one country to the other. So you can see now the scenario of the below 2 degree scenario, so low emission scenario. So you can see that which countries are likely to experience an increase in their hydropower capacity factors while others are decreasing. And if you see the around the 3 degree scenario, so you can see the blue bars are almost the same. The regional mean hydropower capacity factors are almost the same in both scenarios, but you can see that there will be larger increase in some countries and larger decrease in the other countries. So you can see that climate impacts will be largely affected by the level of GHG concentration. Morocco, Zambia, and Zimbabwe are likely to experience a larger decrease in hydropower capacity factor with higher GHG concentrations. However, the larger decrease in the hydropower capacity factor in these countries will be offset by a higher increase in the Nile Basin countries. This will eventually generate the same level of decline of approximately 3% in the regional mean hydropower capacity factor in both scenarios. The hydropower capacity factor will present starker spatial variations with higher GHG concentrations. Countries around the Congo and Zambezi basins will need to cope with the drop in the hydropower capacity factors. On the other hand, as you can see, the Nile Basin countries are projected to see an increase for the remainder of the 21st century. This spatial variation in the hydropower capacity factor is likely to be starker with a higher GHG concentration. In this graph, you can see that there are lighter colored areas and darker colored areas. The lightly colored indicate the gap between the projections of the below 2 degrees Celsius and around the 3 degrees Celsius scenarios. In this around the 3 degrees Celsius scenario, as you can see, the Congo and Zambezi Basin countries may see a greater drop, over 7% on average. On the contrary, the Nile Basin countries are likely to see an increase by more than 7%. It's not just only the challenge which will be posed by climate change. The climate change will actually pose another challenge, which is year-to-year variability in hydropower capacity factors. Most hydropower plants studied in Egypt, Ethiopia, Ghana, Morocco, and Sudan are likely to experience increasing fluctuations in their capacity factors for the remainder of the centuries. In the other countries, we also saw that a large number of hydropower plants are likely to experience a larger fluctuations in their year-to-year hydropower capacity factors. And also you can see this variability is projected to be stronger with higher global GHG concentration, threatening reliable electricity supply. In this graph, each dot represents the relative value of the projected average hydropower capacity factor of each country every 5 years. As you can see in the graph, these dots are more scattered in the around 3 degree scenarios, indicating a higher level of variability. To give you the number of the plants analyzed, 85% present stronger fluctuations in hydropower capacity factors under the higher emission scenario than the low emission scenario. Then how we can cope with this kind of climate impacts? So enhancing resilience of the hydropower infrastructure in Africa is important to ensure reliable electricity supply in the face of increasing climate impacts. Enhanced climate resilience, so you can imagine that it can support uninterrupted, very stable supply of electricity, and also minimize the damages and save costs from climate impacts, and ensure the continuous provision of public services during and after extreme weather events. However, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. A tailored combination of resilience measures based on systematic assessment of climate risks and impacts will help countries and hydropower plants operators increase the resilience of their systems. We introduced a table of the soft measures and hard measures, so that the policymakers and also the decision makers of the operators and regulators can choose the appropriate solution in their circumstances. So soft measures consist of strategies, policies, and actions related to the planning, operational management, and recovery of the hydropower assets. Hard measures, you can imagine some enhancement of them and mounting the power stations and those kind of physical enhancement of infrastructure. But of course, there are some barriers to implementing high resilience measures in Africa. First of all, there is a significant lack of reliable data and information about climate risks and impacts on hydropower in Africa in some part of it. Some places have limited historical data on climate and hydrology. Therefore, even though we are using the projection models, and projection models are largely fed in and also based on the historical trends and historical data, and you can imagine that some of the parts like Sahara, we have lack of observational historical data. So it's a little bit hard to provide a very, very accurate projection of some of those places. And actually, depending on the models, we found that some of the models present actually conflicting or even misleading outcomes. So therefore, many international experts, they are doing their best, and also regional and local experts, they are developing some regional models to add this more accuracy and reduce the uncertainty in our projection models. So I hope that in a few years, we'll have much better information about the climate and hydrological trends of Africa. Another barrier is there are few incentives for decision makers to invest in enhancing the climate resilience of hydropower plants, unfortunately. The benefits of investment in climate resilience measures on hydropower are likely to be seen only after a few years or several decades, while the capital cost to implement those kind of improvements, as you can imagine, it will born immediately. Furthermore, the benefits of resilience tend to be spread across the value chain. The consumer will take a great advantage, and also the producer will take great advantage, but the immediate cost is likely to be imposed only on service providers. And difficulties with sharing costs for the benefits could make decision makers hesitant to initiate some climate resilience measures, despite their longer term and also larger socio-economic benefits. Another barrier is unfavorable regulatory framework could discourage the implementation of climate resilience measures. One of the key messages which IEA is currently making in different reports related to climate impacts, that the absence of climate resilience objectives in the energy master plans or climate master plans may send a misleading signal to the developers. When we are talking about energy systems and climate change, and we usually talk about only mitigation or reduction of emissions from the energy sector, but comparatively, the adaptation aspects of the energy systems are rarely discussed in many places. Therefore, those kind of mainstreaming the discussion in the energy planning and also climate planning related to the adaptation of energy systems will give the right signal to the developers and operators. Some places, particularly in rural areas, still lack the capacity to anticipate and cope with climate impacts. For example, climate prediction and early warning systems for electricity systems are often constrained due to the lack of the capacity of some companies or local governments. Therefore, we would like to make some policy recommendation to the governments. And the reason why we are focusing on the governments is because the benefits of climate resilience and the costs of climate impacts tend to be spread unevenly among stakeholders. Therefore, it inevitably raises the question, who should be responsible? Who should pay for this cost for delivering resilience measures? And so in principle, of course, service providers have responsibility and direct interest in protecting their own assets in providing reliable services to their customers. However, as we already mentioned before, they could be reluctant to implement resilience measures because of the previously mentioned reasons. Therefore, governments need to play a central role in building climate resilience by adopting effective policy measures. Indeed, some governments have already initiated these reports across the world. This report suggests 4 policy recommendations. The first one is ensure a systematic and comprehensive assessment of climate risks and potential impacts is available to all relevant stakeholders. Some governments, international organizations, academia have already introduced a few comprehensive methodologies to identify and assess climate risks to enhance the resilience of hydropower. And IEA's report is one of these efforts. According to a recent study of World Bank, a project to build a resilient infrastructure without appropriate data on climate hazards and those risks would cost 10 times more than a project which has sufficient information. The second recommendation is create the right incentives for electricity providers to align their interests with investments that are beneficial to the public. Governments with limited financial resources could consider also working with multilateral development banks or other support programs of international organizations to create a right level of rewards and penalties. The third recommendation is integrated climate resilience into major energy plans and regulations. Governments can send a strong signal to service providers and developers by mainstreaming climate resilience in the entire process of hydropower planning and operation. For instance, in 2014 and 2015, future climate impacts on energy and water sectors of Uganda were studied. As an outcome of the study, international and local experts made recommendations on how to incorporate climate resilience in planning and project design. As a result, in 2015, Uganda National Climate Change Policy announced specific strategies for hydropower's climate resilience, such as water catchment protection as part of hydropower development, and also diversification of energy sources was considered, and further research on potential impacts on climate change and water resource regulation were all considered in the plan. The fourth recommendation is build capacity of both public and private sector stakeholders. Governments can accelerate the implementation of resilience measures by supporting capacity building for risk and impact assessment, particularly in the rural areas, for forecasting, early warning, emergency response, and recovery. For further details, please visit our website, and our climate impacts on African hydropower was our first edition of our hydropower series. We have, I think about 2 weeks ago, we have published the climate impacts on Latin American hydropower. And also we are currently working on Asian hydropower as well, which will be released in this summer. Moreover, in this summer, we will also publish a report with the special focus on hydropower. We call it Renewables 2021 with hydropower focus. So you will find out more information about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Insun, for this presentation. So we are already receiving some questions. So to all participants, feel free to use the Q&A functionality to ask your questions. And maybe, Jinsoon, while I let you look at the latest two, I can answer the first one. So question from Jovine from Rwanda, asking if you will get the presentation. So the answer is yes. This presentation has been recorded. We will post it on YouTube. So we have a playlist with all the IEA Africa University. So you can have a look at previous sessions and you will get updates of the next one. And for each video, there is a link to the presentation. So you will have access to all that. Maybe, Jinsoon, if, I don't know, one of the two questions you want to answer, either from Emmanuel or Joseph?
Yes. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So yes, actually these kind of loss and benefits, so cost and benefits analysis is one of the key issues we would like to look at, explore more. So I know that there are some development banks have already started these kind of cost benefit analysis with the specific location case studies, but actually IEA hasn't really started this kind of analysis, but we are planning to expand our scope. And this year we are looking at a broader scope of electricity system, not only about the hydropower system. So in those research, we would like to provide the cost benefits findings about what kind of cost we are expecting for the resilience measures and how much it will bring larger benefits. If you want to have a little bit broader insight about this kind of cost benefit, I would recommend that there is recent publications from the World Bank about the Lifeline report, and they tried to look at some of the cost benefit analysis, and I found it very interesting. And also please keep checking our website for our upcoming research on the cost benefit and also the broader theme of the electricity security. And the next question.
Yes, maybe just to read it again for everyone to hear. So a question from Joseph Wilson. Can you give specific example of climate resistance measures being implemented by some countries?
Okay, so there are many examples of climate resistance measures. For example, the physical hardening actually are being done in many countries. So just raising a little bit of the dam heights, or expanding the reservoir size, or mounting up the station level, or etc. Those are being done in many countries. But I feel like soft measures, it will be a little bit harder to find out, and we found a very interesting example from the Africa Risk Facility, and they are providing very good capacity building programs. It is not only focusing on the energy sector only, but we found that those kind of capacity building programs might be very useful for improving the climate resilience in some local areas, in rural areas. And the next question.
Yeah, maybe it's back to more practical question on this capacity reinforcement program. So in the case of Zambia, we still need to define exactly the time of our online course. Most likely it will be beginning of next quarter, so from April. But this needs to be agreed on with our focal point at the Ministry of Energy of Zambia. But we will inform as soon as the date is defined.
And also, what is the best practice business model for running small hydro concessions? Well, in our report, we didn't really distinguish the size of the small hydropower or larger hydropower, and we didn't really distinguish the different type of the technology. So we had that information, and what we did is that in our modeling, so we calculated the existing hydropower's current level of capacity factor. So based on that assumption, we tried to give the relative value. So since we didn't really categorize by size, so we cannot really say that what was the best model for the small hydropower. But we can make sure that even a small hydropower capacity and even different types of the technologies, not only about the impoundment type of technology, but also the runoff river and type of hydropower plants, they were all affected by climate change. And yes, maybe the next studies we can look at how more subtle differences between the different sizes of the hydropower plants or different types of technologies. But for now, we cannot really answer to this question. And thank you, Maria. And she asked about would the regional interconnections decrease the impacts of hydropower capacity factors? Actually, yes, in our 2019 African Energy Outlook, we have discussed this kind of impacts of African power pools, and there is one box of this case study and try to explain that how climate impact will affect will affect the use of the African power pools and the regional integration. We concluded that, as you can see, the different river basins will have different impacts on their hydropower capacity factors. So the regional interconnection can be a solution in many different places. And it's not only about Africa. When we did the research on the Latin America, we also found that those kind of regional interconnections between different river basins, which might experience the different way of the climate impacts, can be solutions and to cope with the increasing seasonal variability. And thank you so much for all these questions. And I found that many people are very much interested in this research, and they would like to learn a little bit more about the more detailed analysis, like cost-benefit analysis or the size type analysis. And I think those are actually the plan we are currently thinking about to develop our project. And please understand the climate impacts on African hydropower plant was our initial report of our all climate resilience plans, and it will be developed further with more details. And also we are looking forward to seeing the results from the IPCC new report, which will be published in this year and next year. So it's based on the newly available climate and hydrological models as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jinsoon. Unless there are other questions, maybe just do a bit of teasing for our next webinar. So the topic will be a presentation of the 2020 IEA Renewables Report. So we will discuss global trends of the renewable sector. So it will be renewables for the power sector, of course, but also renewables in transport, in heat. And the idea would be to present the latest numbers of 2020, which is such an extraordinary year where we saw a lot of a big shock to the energy systems. So our experts from renewable team will detail how things evolved fuel by fuel in 2020 compared to the previous year. And we will also look at short-term outlook, so a horizon of 5 years, how these markets, how all these energies are likely to evolve in different regions. So it will be a slightly different perspective than what we discussed in a previous webinar with the World Energy Outlook presentation, which is a longer term outlook, but it's very complementary. So we will also share the invitation, and feel free to maybe have a look at our publication if you want to have questions prepared in advance. So unless there is any other question, and by the way, you can also take the floor and speak. I know that in the room we might have experts of hydropower or experts of climate, and if you want to share your specific context, I know there are people from Zambia where hydropower counts so much, and meteorological changes have impacted the capacity of hydropower to provide electricity to the country. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak up, to share your experience, or to ask questions. We still have a bit of time for that.
Thank you. And also during the meantime, as you all know, that the adaptation and resilience is one of the key priorities by the COP26 UK presidency. So I expect in the COP26, there will be more discussions on the adaptation and resilience in IEA, which have been involved in play a very important role in the mitigation part of the energy sector, is now also expanding our work on the adaptation and resilience issues as well. So we are looking forward to work together with you, and we would like to listen to your experience and your expertise about these issues. So please feel free to contact us and to share your experience and your suggestions for the further development of this project.
Okay, not seeing any questions, so I'm closing now. Thank you very, very much, Jinsoon, for having taken the time to share those insights with our group of African energy experts. And thanks to all of you for your participation. Looking forward to more discussions, to our training, and to more webinars, and with the next one in 1 month on the renewable 2020 market. Have a good day, all.
Very much.